Chapter 22, the lymphatic system. This is a huge chapter. So what that's going to mean for us is we're probably going to have exam or Unit 3 exam with Chapter 22 and Chapter 23, but I'll make Chapter 24 a homework assignment because right now we are so compressed for time. And I'll be honest, I think that the digestive system is a little easier to understand. This system is a lot more complicated because it has the immune portion of one of our systems, and that's actually really complicated. We are actually also going to be kind of skipping a lot. I'll tell you what I want you to know and what I don't want you to know, but it's important that you know, of course, as always, the functions. So, outline of the chapter. Lymphatic system. It's made up of lymph. Lymph is a fluid, okay? Just so you know. The lymphatic vessels, which you can see in green on this lady. The lymphatic tissue, which includes the lymphatic nodules and things like that. The lymphatic nodes, or the lymph nodes, which... see these bean-looking things over here? These are going to be the lymph nodes. When you go into the doctor and you say your throat hurts and he palpates your throat, he's actually feeling for these, and we'll explain that. The tonsils are also part of this, the spleen and the thymus. So we have three main functions when it comes to the lymphatic system, fluid balance being one of them. So we have three primary fluids in our body. We have the plasma, which is the stuff our blood cells float in. We have the lymph, which is the stuff that the lymphatic system picks up. And we have the interstitial fluid, which is the fluid between our tissue cells. Technically, they are all the same fluid. The only difference between them is location. The plasma is in our blood vessels. The interstitial fluid is between our tissues. The lymph is in our lymphatic vessels. The thing with our blood vessels is they are leaky. They're designed to do this exchange thing, and what that means is they leak fluid out. If we leave the fluid in the tissues for too long, we end up with a hypotonic solution. If you think back to AP1 when we talked about the hypotonic solution, we talked about the fact that cells in a hypotonic solution will eventually overinflate like a balloon, and sometimes they can rupture. So we can't leave that fluid there. Well, the lymph vessels actually pick up that excess fluid, whatever's left in the tissues, and they take it back into general circulation. They take it back to the cardiovascular system. The second function is fat absorption. So this becomes an issue. Fat doesn't like the watery environment of the blood, right? So if I try to put it into water, it's going to go, nope, I don't like it, and pop right back out. So you actually have to put this into something called a transport protein. Now, the transport protein you can kind of think of as a box that holds this fat. Now, this is the problem. It goes from being something relatively small, like this, into something that's this big. My blood vessels only have teeny tiny pores or holes in the lining of those vessels. This big ginormo thing won't fit. But my lymphatic vessels actually have these big, huge trap doors. It's like having a room door that goes into your bedroom versus a garage door. Garage door is a lot bigger. I'm not going to be able to fit a car through my bedroom door, but if I have a garage door, I can. So we pick up here in the lymphatic vessel these fats, and we drop them off in general circulation anyway. Remember, all the fluid we're picking up gets put back into general circulation. So these things that are inside of our digestive system, that are lymphatic vessels that pick up our fats, are called lacteals. Okay? They're responsible for absorbing fats. The fats go through the lymphatic system and through general circulation through the lymphatic circulation until they get dropped off in the general circulation. Now, this fluid that I'm picking up with all of this excess fat is actually called chyle. I know it starts with a CH, but you still pronounce it chyle. It kind of has a milky appearance, almost like Italian dressing, because it's got so much fat content to that fluid. Okay, so that's the second function. Third function is defense. This is the more, I guess, complex function that we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about. The blood is filtered of microorganisms by the spleen. Remember, spleen is one of the organs. Lymph is actually filtered through the lymph nodes. You got to remember that picking up fluid that's been sitting in between tissue cells, the tissue cells are living things, they're dropping their garbage off in that fluid. It's like going to a ditch, taking a cup and picking up the cup and going, drink it. Yet, no, you don't do that. You'd have to filter that fluid before you put it anywhere. So as we pick up, we kind of make pit stops along the way at all of those lymph nodes, those little green pinto bean looking things, and we filter as we go, making sure that by the time we dump it back into general circulation, it is completely clean. Now, this is the complicated part. The lymphocytes, your T and your B cells, they're capable of destroying microorganisms and other foreign substances. Now, the thing that makes this so interesting is they have memory. And they have specificity. They remember the things that they go after, and they are specific. They go after a specific target. They know cold virus 3A, and that's what they go after. So that's the part that's going to take us quite a bit of time explaining, is that immune defense. So the lymphatic vessels, going from the capillaries, which are the smallest, they kind of join together to make vessels that make pit stops at lymph nodes for filtering and getting it cleaned up. They go back into lymphatic vessels, and they actually get dropped off at lymphatic trunks. The trunks are what are attached to the vein where they drop that off back into general circulation. Because the whole reason I'm collecting the fluid is so that I can put it back into the blood. So if you look here, see these trap doors? You can see that they're like on hinges and they open up, as opposed to being a blood vessel that has little teeny tiny pinholes in it. This is actually a really, really big door to go into. So something that's very different compared to your cardiovascular system. Your cardiovascular system is a continuous set of tubing. There's never an end anywhere. It literally goes heart out to the body, back to the heart, out to the lungs, back to the heart. There's never a dead end. With your lymphatic system, your lymphatic capillaries are dead ends. You can see them here. And this dead end that you see that's animated is actually one of these dead ends. As the pressure from the fluid gets greater and greater, as fluid gets dropped off in between these tissue cells, it's basically like a trapdoor. I put pressure down here, and as that pressure increases and increases and increases, you actually get this thing to open, just like if you were standing on a trapdoor. Once the fluid is inside here, it actually travels. And we've got these valves, okay? The valves are kind of like the heart valves. They work real good in one direction, but not the other. So once it gets into the chamber that it's in, it can literally only go one direction, because if it tries to go backward, the valve slams shut. So the capillaries join to form larger vessels, which you can see the individual capillaries here joining to make a larger vessel, joining to make a larger vessel. They do resemble the smaller veins. They've got kind of a middle layer of smooth muscle, but they're pretty thin. They kind of do the whole deflated balloon thing like a vein does. They also have a beaded appearance. If you look down here, you can see it kind of looks like a pea pod. The reason that it looks like that is because of the valves. Every time that you have one of these valves, you have one of these indents. Now, again, what does the valve do? It makes sure that the flow of lymph only goes in one direction. You can't go backwards. There's no backflow. So how do I get it to go from chamber to chamber? Believe it or not, this is very close to how your veins work. Remember that I've got these valves that I just pointed out, right? And I just said that it has smooth muscle. So if I squeeze the valve, or I'm sorry, I squeeze the vessel with smooth muscle, it's basically going to cause that fluid to shoot up. Now, the other thing that I have, that's number one. Wow, that's a terrible color. Sorry, guys. That's number one. Number two, the contraction of skeletal muscle. Think about your bicep, you know, show me your muscles, right? When the muscle contracts, the middle of it, the belly of it kind of gets fat. Well, when you contract your muscles and this middle portion gets fat, it gets wide, it actually squeezes this vessel. It's almost like you having a tube of toothpaste in between your two fists and you squeezing with your two fists. That toothpaste would go shooting up. Thoracic pressure changes. So your thorax, where your lungs and your heart are, is a sealed system. So if you take a breath in, you're creating a vacuum in that space. Now I'm going to go back for a second. This right here, that drop-off point with those trunks that we talked about, is actually in that thoracic cavity. When you suck in air and you create that vacuum, it basically draws that fluid up almost like you're sucking fluid into a straw. When you use a straw and you suck fluid up, you're creating a vacuum. That's why the fluid moves up, because you're sucking the air out of it, so the liquid's replacing it. It's basically the same concept. These are the three ways that we move lymph from around the body back up into general circulation. So the lymph nodes, bean-shaped body, right? What do? They filter the lymph that it enters and exits through the lymphatic vessels. And as you can see here, they're connected to each other. I mean, they're not isolated. If I have lymph fluid coming up here, it makes a pit stop at this one. Hang on, let me get another color. So if I have fluid coming in here, it makes a pit stop here, 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 and that's before I get to the thorax where that drop-off point is. It's almost like I'm filtering it multiple times to make sure it's as clean as it can possibly be. I don't just have a water filter on my sink. I also pour that into a filtered pitcher. And then before I pour that into my glass, I pour it into another filtered pitcher. So I'm getting it cleaner and cleaner and cleaner every time I put it through this series. Don't worry about that. Here are the trunks. Okay. You can see that they're actually attached to the subclavian vein. All right, so here's the dealio. Your lymphatic system is very different, just depending on how genetics made it grow. One of the reasons that we don't have like, this is what the trunks look like, is because it can vary. It may be independently entering like this, or it may have what you see here with one big trunk with all of these smaller vessels entering into that one trunk. And unfortunately, which way it goes is really variable. We don't know. Okay, so how do I qualify as lymphatic tissue? When I say I am a lymphatic tissue, what do I have to have? I have to have specific cell types. I have to have specific cell types, and I have to have specific fibers. Reticular fibers. When we talked about reticular fibers in AP1, I talked about packing peanuts. And I said that it's kind of like it fills spaces. Well, you have to remember it's fibers. It's not thick like packing peanuts in a package, but it does fill the space. By having all of these fibers overlaying each other and filling that space, I'm basically making a filter. If you are not small enough to fit through all these fibers, you don't get to go through. So when we talk about the fibers, that's what we're talking about. Cells that you will find macrophages. Macro means large, phago means eat. You will find dendritic cells. You will find lymphocytes, specifically B and T cells. Okay? That is the primary cell type. You'll also find reticular cells because they're the ones making the reticular fibers. So if I'm a lymphatic tissue, this is what I'm made of. We have two types. We either have encapsulated or we have non-encapsulated. Guess what the difference is? That's right, it's a capsule. Encapsulated means that you've got a capsule that is surrounded by, or you've got tissue that's surrounded by a connective tissue capsule. You're your own organ. So you've got the lymph nodes, you've got the spleen, you've got the thymus, you've got the tonsils. Non-encapsulated is kind of lymphatic tissue that is embedded into something else. So I've got my intestine, right? Inside the lining of my intestine, I have these little collections of lymphatic tissue called lymphatic nodules, okay? Now, they are not their own independent organ. They're literally embedded inside of that intestine. It's called the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. So since they're not their own organ and encapsulated in their own connective tissue coating, we say that they are non-encapsulated, okay? Now, cell organization, it can be diffuse, where they're just kind of dispersed everywhere, or it can be dense, which is a lymphatic nodule. If you look here, you can see this sphere right here. That sphere is a lymphatic nodule. You can also see that there are cells out here. Yes? Those would be the diffuse lymphoid tissue. They're not in that nodule. Those things that I just drew, those little circles that I just drew back here, are an example of a lymphatic nodule. Specifically, when they are in the intestine, we call them Peyer's patches. Okay? So literally, when it comes to the organization, it's either spread out and diffuse, or it's dense and it's a lymphatic nodule. The tonsils. You have actually 3 sets of tonsils. You have the pharyngeal tonsil, which is actually kind of up toward your nose. The palatine tonsil, which is the one that when your throat hurts, you go, does my throat look swollen? And you stick your tongue out. And then you've got the lingual tonsil, which is actually on the back of your tongue. These are large group of lymphatic nodules and diffuse lymphatic tissue deep in the mucous membranes of the oral cavity, so your mouth, and the nasopharynx, so up toward your nose. They protect against bacteria and other potentially harmful material entering. This is an entry point for a lot of things. You breathe through this. You eat through this. So having kind of this army of cells whose job it is to make sure that things are clean, be stationed in that area is actually a good thing. The lymph nodes, like I said, they're the bean-shaped structures that you see here. Okay. Lymphocytes actually go to the lymph nodes. They stay there and congregate, they function here, and they proliferate. When you get sick, this is where those lymphocytes actually start to reproduce. It's at least one of the places. You do have 2 types of these. You've got the superficial that are toward the surface of your body. These are the ones that the doctor will palpate if you say your throat hurts. And then you've got those that are deep in the tissues where your organs are. Those can't be palpated. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Don't really worry about that. Okay, afferent and efferent. Afferent, arriving. Okay. Efferent, exit. Okay. Afferent vessels, Afferent vessels are vessels that actually are bringing fluid from a tube somewhere, and they're arriving with the fluid, and that fluid actually has to percolate its way through this lymph node to get out through that efferent vessel. When it's percolating, it's like putting it through a filtration system. If you get caught, I've got cells in this. Remember, macrophages are in here that will eat you. You should not be here. I'm going to get rid of you because you shouldn't be here. Now, this is kind of the interesting thing about this. When this happens, you get an inflammatory response. So these lymph nodes swell up because they're basically fighting a battle. They're fighting invaders. When that happens and your lymph nodes get swollen, that's what the doctor's looking for when he palpates your throat when you say your throat hurts. He's looking for swollen lymph nodes because that actually means these guys in your throat are having a battle. So there's bacteria or virus or something there that's causing that. Okay, so lymph slowly filters through, right? And we're removing all of the things that aren't supposed to be in here. The foreign substances can actually stimulate those lymphocytes, those B and T cells, to proliferate. It can make them make more. Basically so that, hang on. Okay. They can stimulate the lymphocyte proliferation. New cells are released into the lymph, basically so that they can reach the blood, so they can get into your tissues in your body, so they can fight. That's kind of what I want you to know about that. Now, the spleen. The spleen is actually an organ that is located up here, okay? So it's in the left superior side of your abdomen. What are the functions? Functions. 1, it destroys defective red blood cells. When red blood cells start to die because they have that finite lifespan, they kind of become misshapen. They get caught in the spleen, and the spleen gets rid of them because we need to recycle. 2, it'll detect and respond to foreign substances in the blood. Your blood goes through your spleen and it gets filtered. If there's something foreign there, your spleen will respond to it. 3, it acts like a blood reservoir. It's actually a holding tank for blood. Okay, so I'm going to introduce 2 words. Don't worry about the rest of it for right now, but stroma will always mean framework. Parenchyma will always mean functional portion. You know how medulla always means middle and cortex always means outside? This is the same. If you hear parenchyma, it's the functional portion of an organ. If you hear stroma, it's basically the girders in the building. It's just a framework. So I am going to talk about the 2 parts of the functional portion, okay? The white pulp, which you can see here, right around this capillary, and the red pulp, which is this stuff out here, okay? You can actually see in the picture they are 2 different colors. And you can see here, this is the white pulp here, or I'm sorry, this is the, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. The white pulp, this guy here, has 2 major regions, the periarterial lymphatic sheath and the lymphatic nodule, whereas the red pulp has the splenic cords and the venous sinuses. Again, red pulp out here is the red pulp out here. White pulp in here is the white in here. Okay, so let's talk about those. So the white pulp. This thing here that you can see that I'm outlining. All right, you've got the periarterial lymphatic sheath. Peri means around, arterial. This area that's right next to the artery is the periarterial lymphatic sheath. It's diffuse lymphatic tissue surrounded by arteries and arterioles. in this space, you have a high number of T cells. Okay, that's the high T cell concentration. Now, the lymphatic nodules, technically something in here is supposed to look like that circle that we talked about in the intestine. That's the lymphatic nodule. You've got a dense collection of lymphatic tissue. It's in that sphere structure. As the arteries enter, they split and give rise to capillaries supplying the red pulp. You can see that splitting at number 3 here. But in these dense bodies that you see, you got high numbers of B cells, not T cells. Okay? Okay. Looking at the red pulp. So we're looking at this area over here. Well, actually, this area. Okay. You've got the splenic cords, which are these things. Okay. If you look, you can see fibers, you can see macrophages, you can see red blood cells, okay? And then you've got the venous sinuses. These are these blue football-looking things. All right, I'm going to erase what I just pointed out so that I can show you the details now, okay? The splenic cords are a network of reticular cells that are making fibers. I want you to notice that some of these capillaries aren't connected to anything. So they're basically just leaking into this space. As the blood goes through, it has to kind of work its way through all of these fibers to eventually either get back to one of these or to get to this blood vessel. If you're a normal red blood cell, you shouldn't have any problem doing that because I can fold like a tortilla. I can kind of wiggle my way through. If not, you're going to get caught on one of these fibers, and these macrophages are actually going to eat you so that I can recycle your iron. Okay? Now, the venous sinuses. Those are these big football-looking dudes. Okay? We've got these in large capillaries between the section of the splenic cords. Typically, they connect to this vein here. If I'm directly connected with the blood supply, like what you see here, it means the blood is just going to go through and eventually it's going to drain out of the spleen. If I'm not, though, you have to work your way into one of these so that you can get to the splenic vein. Now, why is this important? If you get caught up in that fibrous network that is in the red pulp, it means there's something wrong with you. Either I need to check you out, the macrophage needs to eat you so that if you're a red blood cell, I can recycle my iron, or if you're a bacteria so that I can get rid of you because you're not supposed to be here. So again, looking at this, you've got 2 types of flow here, rapid and slow. The directly linked capillary. This is rapid flow. I literally just follow the tubing and I'm through into the splenic vein. However, the slow flow that I'm talking about is when it leaks out and it actually has to wiggle its way through all of these fibers to get to the other side. Okay. So the thymus. This is the thymus right here. It sits above your heart but behind your sternum. Looks like this. Okay? In slides, it looks like this. You can see that we've got a medulla, a middle, and a cortex. Okay? Thymus is the site of T cell maturation. Thymus T. It's capable of reacting to foreign substances. Most will actually degenerate over time. As far as the T cells themselves. But those that actually are mature and basically pass 2 tests are able to go into the bloodstream and basically protect us from disease. It does have a capsule. It does have trabeculae, those little divisions that you see. Actually, you know what? Don't worry about that for now. Just don't worry about that. I'm more worried about you knowing this part. So in the cortex, this darker region out here, okay, that dark region out here, the lymphocytes are more numerous. The lymphocytes, again, are the B and the T cells. They stain really darkly. The inner region, this kind of lighter region, actually has fewer lymphocytes, and we do have some unique structures called thymic corpuscles. We know that they exist. We know that they don't look like anything else. We have no clue what they do, just so you're aware. So this is kind of a major outline of everything that we've just gone through. We have fluid in the tissues. It gets picked up. I need another color. We have fluid in the tissues. It gets picked up by the lymphatic capillaries, gets filtered through the lymph nodes, eventually goes to a trunk, and gets put back into general circulation. We have the lacteals in the small intestine that are picking up the fat-laden chyme, that fluid, and basically going back into general circulation. It's almost like taking a detour so that I can get to a specific place. I'm still absorbing that nutrient of fat. It's just going through the lymphatic system instead of going through the cardiovascular system. The blood goes through the spleen and gets filtered. If you pass, you get to go back into general circulation. If you don't, I've got macrophages that are going to tear you apart. The bone marrow is where I make my B and T cells. B cells are actually mature when they leave, go into general circulation, no big deal. But the T cells are called pre-T cells. They actually have to go into circulation and go back around to get to my thymus. Remember, T cells, thymus. So those pre-T cells go into the thymus. They get tested. They get basically checked out. If they pass, they become mature T cells and again go into general circulation, but only if they pass. Now, these B and T cells that I'm talking about here and here, when they go into general circulation and start going into the body, they will end up in the lymphatic tissues, whether that's the lymphatic nodules in the lymph nodes or in the tonsils or in the spleen. Who knows? But they end up in those tissues where they actually function. If for some reason we get an infection, they will actually go into the body to go and find the infection and fight it, which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay, so that's going to be the first part of chapter 22.